Good morning, students. Today, let us learn about synthetic theory of evolution. Synthetic theory of evolution is also referred to as genetical theory of natural selection or neo-Darwinism. It is the modern concept of organic evolution which has been developed by scientists like Sewell Wright, R.A. Fisher, T. Dobzhansky, H.J. Muller, J. Huxley, J.B.S. Haldane, G.L. Stebbins, and others. It is a new approach to organic evolution in the light of new branches of biology like genetics, cell biology, molecular biology, etc. According to this theory, sexual reproduction plays an important role in evolution. So far as evolution is concerned, a population consists of genes of all the individuals in the population. This is called gene pool. Gene pool is defined as the sum total of genes occurring in a population of sexually reproducing organisms. Hence, the gene pool and additions or deletions of genes from the gene pool are the focal points of synthetic theory of evolution. Some biologists have redefined evolution in genetic terms as a change in the gene frequency. Gene frequency is the frequency of an allele or a gene in a gene pool. Changes in the gene pool results in variations, and variations lead to the development of a new species. We may list 5 evolutionary forces that change the gene frequencies. They are: number 1, mutations; number 2, gene flow; number 3, genetic drift; number 4, isolation; number 5, natural selection. Number 1, mutations. Mutation is a sudden heritable change in the genetic makeup of an organism. Dobzhansky stated that mutation is a mistake or misprint in cell division. The mutation produces a variation which is the cause of organic evolution. The various types of mutations are as follows. Dominant mutation. When mutation produces a dominant gene, it is called dominant mutation. Dominant mutation expresses the character immediately. Next, recessive mutation. When mutation produces a recessive gene, it is called recessive mutation. Most of the natural mutations are recessive in nature. The recessive mutation do not expresses the character immediately, but it is expressed only when the mutant gene occurs in double dose. Next, gene mutation. The sudden heritable change of a gene from one form to another form is called gene mutation or point mutation. It is called point mutation because it affects only a particular locus in the chromosome. Locus is a point in the chromosome where a particular gene is located. The gene mutation is classified into different types which are named as follows. First, deletion. Loss of one or more nucleotide from a gene is called deletion. A nucleotide is a fundamental unit of DNA and RNA and are composed of a nitrogen base which is attached to a sugar phosphate unit. Thus, nucleotides are the building blocks of nucleic acids. Next, insertion. addition of one or more nucleotides to a gene. Inversion, in this case, a segment of DNA is removed and reinserted in a reverse direction. Next, substitution. In this case, one nucleotide is replaced by another nucleotide. Substitution is of two types. Number A, transversion. It is a substitution mutation where purine is replaced by pyrimidine and pyrimidine is replaced by purine. Adenine and guanine are called purines. Cytosine, uracil and thymine are called pyrimidines. Number B, transition. It is a substitution mutation where purine is replaced by another purine or pyrimidine is replaced by another pyrimidine. Mutations are considered to be the raw materials for evolution. They are the source of all genetic variation in a population or in a gene pool. The mutation process constantly generates new hereditary variants. These variants accumulate in the population. The mutation may be useful or useless or harmful or neutral to the population. The population will be benefited by the production of useful mutations. So mutations are the evolutionary forces that change the gene frequencies, which in turn causes organic evolution. Next, second evolutionary force, gene flow. Transfer of genes between populations which differ genetically from one another but can interbreed is called gene flow, or it is the flow of genes from one gene pool to another gene pool. Thus, it becomes an important and quick way of causing changes in gene frequency. Gene pool is defined as the sum total of genes occurring in a population of sexually reproducing organisms. Gene flow occurs when individuals migrate among the populations. They contribute their genes to another gene pool. The gene flow increases the amount of variability within the population. For example, the migration of Africans and Indians to USA has resulted in the change of gene frequencies of white human population. A change in the gene frequency in a population will thus depend on the rate of gene flow from another population. Next, third evolutionary force, genetic drift or fluctuation. A change or variation in the gene frequency purely as a matter of chance is called genetic drift. Genetic drift can occur both in larger and small populations, but only in small population it creates an important effect. When a population is small, there is a greater possibility of chance causing changes in gene frequencies. Through genetic drift, some alleles become established and others are lost. This happens irrespective of its survival value. Supposing there is a population of blue parrots and green parrots, and the allele controlling blue feather color is lost as a result of genetic drift, all the parrots of the next generation will be green. This change has not arisen because green feather color is more advantageous, but because chance events led to a change in genotype. Sewell Wright was the first to recognize that genetic drift could change gene frequencies. Hence, genetic drift is also called Sewell Wright effect. Next, bottleneck phenomenon. The term is coined by Stebbins, hence it is also called Stebbins effect. The environmental fluctuations like shortage of food or outbreak of diseases may bring about a marked decrease in the number of individuals. Then the population goes through a bottlenecked effect. The yearly cyclic phenomenon of population is called bottleneck effect. Stebbins effect is also, that is, Stebbins effect is the transformation of larger population into smaller population and vice versa. Examples: lemmings are small rodents of Scandinavian mountains. These rodents show bottleneck phenomena. In every 4 years, the population of lemmings reaches an unbearable maximum level. At this maximum level, the lemmings migrate to the coast, plunge into the sea, and committed suicide. The population is re-established by the few which remains in the mountains. And this is a clear, perfect example of bottleneck effect or phenomenon. Next, isolation. Isolation is the separation of individuals of a species by some barrier which prevents interbreeding. Separation of a single population into subunits is called isolation. When interbreeding is prevented, gene flow between populations is also prevented. The isolated groups do not interbreed. Each group may develop a set of new characters which leads to the development of new species. The term isolation mechanism was first coined by Dobzhansky in 1932. According to him, without isolation, organic evolution is not possible. The mechanism by which interbreeding is prevented is called isolating mechanism. The isolating mechanisms are of two types, namely geographical isolation and reproductive isolation. First, geographical isolation. The separation of two populations by geographical barriers such as landmass, oceans, mountains, deserts, and thick forests is called geographical isolation. Thus, there is no possibility of interbreeding between isolated groups. The isolated groups in course of time forms two different species. Example: the Indian giant squirrel Ratufa indica lives in forests. It is yellowish in color in the deciduous forests of Gujarat, light brown in the deciduous forests of Maharashtra, and deep brown in the evergreen forests of Mysore. Here, forests act as barriers, and this leads to the development of subspecies with different colors within a species. Next, reproductive isolation. This is the separation of population based on structure, function, and behavior that prevents interbreeding between populations. The following are the various types of reproductive isolating mechanisms. Number 1, ethological isolation. In some species, differences in sexual behavior prevents interbreeding between individuals. This is called ethological isolation. Example: Drosophila melanogaster and Drosophila simulans have different patterns of courtship movements, so interbreeding is not possible between them. Number 2, seasonal isolation. Here interbreeding is prevented because of differences in the breeding seasons. Example: Amblystoma tigrinum and Amblystoma maculatum lives in the same area but do not interbreed, as Amblystoma tigrinum completes breeding before March and Amblystoma maculatum breeds after March. Number 3, habitat isolation. Here isolation is prevented because of different habitats. Water snake Natrix cypedon lives in freshwater and also in salt water. They do not mate with each other because of habitat differences. Next evolutionary force, natural selection. Natural selection is an evolutionary theory proposed by Charles Darwin. It explains the mechanism of evolution and origin of species. The natural selection operates by selecting favorable organisms and eliminates unfavorable organisms. The best experimental support for the operation of natural selection was provided by Kettlewell in his study Industrial Melanism. Kettlewell studied natural selection in the peppered moth Biston betullaria. About 130 years ago, all the peppered moth lived in Great Britain were white colored. The white color was due to the absence of melanin pigments. They lived in white background of lichens on the bark of trees. The white color of moths is matched with the background of white lichens. So birds could not pick and eat white moths. The white body color was favorable variation, and this variation was selected by the nature. The non-melanic forms or white-colored moths survived before 1845. In 1845, one black moth or melanic form appeared, and this was due to a single mutation. The black moth was called Biston carbonaria. In 1848, the black variety forms 1% of the total population, but in 1898, black variety formed 99% of the population. After 1848, more and more industries were developed. The smoke and soot arising from the industry were deposited in the surrounding area, including the bark of tree. So the bark of trees become dark. Now under this background, the white or non-melanic moths were easily picked and captured by birds. In this situation, white body is an unfavorable variation, and this variation is rejected by the natural selection. On the other hand, black moth now had favorable variation and is selected by the natural selection. Kettlewell took melanic and non-melanic moths and distributed them in highly industrialized city Manchester and non-industrialized city Dorsal. After some months, he captures them and found that more than 90% were melanic forms from the Manchester and more than 90% were non-melanic forms from the Dorsal. Thus, industrial melanism clearly explains the operation of natural selection. According to Johansson, natural selection is effective in genetically mixed population but ineffective in genetically uniform population. Mutation causes variations which may be favorable or unfavorable or neutral. The animals provided with favorable variations are well adapted in the given environment. The environment also favors the individuals which are provided with favorable variations. Natural selection favors the genotype which has maximum adaptive value. This is the adaptive value or Darwinian fitness of the genotype. Thus, natural selection fixes up favorable variations and eliminates unfavorable variations. Another example of natural selection is insecticide resistance in mosquitoes. Mosquitoes are the vectors of diseases such as malaria and filaria. In the 1950s, they were controlled by the extensive use of pesticide, a chlorinated hydrocarbon, namely DDT. Its use was so effective that India had cut the incidence of malaria to negligible level. However, in 1970s, malaria came back and it was found that DDT was ineffective against mosquitoes. How can this be explained? In the original mosquito population, there were already some mutant individuals which were resistant to DDT. However, their number was small. When DDT came into use, they had a distinct advantage over the sensitive mosquitoes. Hence, they were able to survive and reproduce while the sensitive ones died in large numbers. As a result, over a period of time, the resistant population increased and this made DDT ineffective. Hence, a change in the environment, that is introduction of DDT, was able to bring about a change in the frequency of alleles by differential reproduction. Gradually, the genotype structure of the population shifts towards more resistant phenotypes. Insecticide resistance is another example for directional selection. Next, types of natural selection. The three types of natural selection are: number one, stabilizing selection. It's a type of natural selection that favors the average individuals in a population. For example, for a plant, the plants that are very tall are exposed to more wind and are at a risk of being blown over. The plants that are very short fail to get enough sunlight. Therefore, the plants that are a middle height between the two get both enough light and protection from the wind. Number two, directional selection. This type of natural selection occurs when selective pressures are working in favor of one extreme of a trait. Example, giraffes with the longest necks are able to reach more leaves of a tree. Selective pressures will work in the advantage of the longer neck giraffes, and therefore the distribution of trait within the population will shift towards longer neck trait. Number three, disruptive selection or diversifying selection. This type of natural selection occurs when pressures are working in favor of two extremes and against the intermediate trait. Example, an area that has black, white and grey bunnies contains both black and white rocks. Both the traits for white and black will be favored by natural selection since they both prove useful for camouflage. The intermediate trait grey does not prove as useful and therefore selective pressures act against the trait. That's all.